Welcome to the Task 1 edTPA overview for the University of Alabama College of Education. This video is for all content areas. Before you begin Task 1, I urge you to read Making Good Choices. This is a separate handbook from your program handbook, and while it is the same for all programs, for elementary education with task 4 mathematics, there is a separate addendum for the Making Good Choices that includes that fourth task. Everyone else, the task 1 through 3, are very similar, and so there's one book for all programs. And Making Good Choices will help you organize for your 3 tasks. Keep in mind that Task 1 is the planning task that you will then plan, teach, and assess all on the same central focus and all on the same 3 to 5 lessons that you will plan during Task 1. This video is going to give you a step-by-step of what you're going to be doing for Task 1. There's also going to be other videos that break down the commentary as well as some program-specific videos. You can find that step-by-step that goes through what we're going to be talking about around page 7 in your handbook. So after you write the context for learning, and you should have already done that and submitted to SLL, if you have not already reviewed the context for learning video, I urge you to go ahead and press pause, go look up the context for learning video, complete that, and then come back to this video. The next thing you're going to be doing is identifying when you will be teaching and what you might be teaching. Think about what you might be teaching. Refer to the pacing guide for the suggested teaching week. Consult your district and school pacing guide, as well as talk to your mentor teacher about what you anticipate teaching that week. Look at the Making Good Choices in your handbook for some suggestions as to what will make a good edTPA lesson, what components you will need for your edTPA lesson. For elementary, do not just select phonics only. Phonics can be a component of your lessons, but that should not be the whole lesson. Should not be just 3 to 5 phonics lessons. Now, I always have a student that says that's what my teacher wants me to teach, or CKLA is very heavily based on phonics. Yes, it is. But there is usually a component there's always a component to CKLA that is far beyond just the phonics component. And as we go through, we'll be talking more about what that central focus can be for elementary. For early childhood, you need to have an interdisciplinary component to your central focus. So that means that your central focus, if you want to focus on a science or social studies element, then you incorporate those math and language arts elements within that. Do not select just vocabulary. The next thing you're going to be doing is selecting your central focus. So after you decide what you're going to be teaching or when you're going to be teaching, you look at kind of what is the main idea of what I'm teaching. What is the central focus that all of those 3 to 5 lessons are built around? Your objective is for one lesson that you are planning, and then those objectives should be scaffolded and built upon each other to really tell what your central focus is, or what is the main idea of what you want your children to understand, or what you want your students to understand. If you're walking down the hall and someone asks you, what are you teaching this week? For everyone but elementary, your answer to that question will be your central focus. For elementary, because elementary education language arts must also have an essential literacy skill and a related skill, edTPA has created an extra tool to help you with your central focus. Your central focus for elementary should either be comprehension or composition. If you look at Appendix A on page 57 of Understanding Rubric Level Progression, you are going to see a chart, and this chart actually runs, I believe, about 7 pages. And it's going to say for central focuses involving comprehension, and then you're going to select on the left-hand side one of your essential literacy strategies, and then on the right side it's going to have the related skills that could enhance those essential literacy strategies. At the top here, you're going to want to read this section because it's going to explain the essential literacy strategies and related skills. CKLA is going to address one of these essential literacy skills, at least one of them, in each one of their units. So if you look at the teacher's instruction manual, it will address one of these components. Do not just look at information that maybe your teacher purchased from Teacher Pay Teacher that says that it goes along with CKLA. Actually look at the CKLA Teacher's Manual. Now I want you to think about your central focus. Go ahead and pause. Write down what you are thinking about for your central focus. Maybe if you're social studies, you're thinking about my central focus is going to be the actions that influence the start of World War II. Maybe if you are elementary, you are going to be doing composition as your central focus, and composition of a 5-paragraph narrative. Then think about what Lesson 1, Lesson 2, and Lesson 3 can be about. And remember, you could have a Lesson 4 and Lesson 5 also, but you don't get bonus points for doing an extra lesson. And so 3 lessons is just fine. If, because of the way your class is structured, you need to go into 5 lessons, that's okay too. Also, consider that if you are early childhood, or maybe you are on a block schedule, you could teach 2 lessons the same day, and then maybe a 3rd and 4th lesson the second day. But you really need to make sure that your 3 to 5 lessons, even if you are planning on teaching them the same day, they have a definite beginning and ending point. You're going to identify the content standards that you are going to be using. Now, you can use your Alabama standards. That is what I would recommend, but you're not going to say the word Alabama. You're just going to use state standards. If your area of concentration Like, for instance, physical education has shape standards. You can definitely use those shape standards. But for physical education, those anchor standards, those 5 anchor standards, are not the standards you should be using in your lesson plans. You should be using the guidelines for the specific grades. Next, you're going to be writing 3 to 5 lesson plans based off of the standards you chose. I strongly recommend only selecting 1, 2, or 3 standards. For most areas, I suggest only selecting 1 standard that you're really going to focus on. For physical education, I recommend you focusing on 3 standards, 1 for each one of the domains. When writing your lesson plans, you may select any template that you are comfortable using, as long as it talks about assessments, it talks about the standards and objectives that you're going to use, and it has some type of like instructional strategies. This is really any template that you will have been asked to use in your previous courseworks at the University of Alabama are just fine. So there is not a specific template for edTPA. Some suggestions and tips for planning your lesson is to write down questions that you will actually ask during that lesson and put those in the instructional strategy part of your lesson. Plan for conversations between students and what those conversations are going to look like and when they're going to occur. Plan for engagement of students. The lesson plans really need to be planned so that you're not just standing up giving a presentation, but there's interaction between the students and interaction between you and the students are doing something. And plan a variety of different and multiple assessments. You should have an assessment planned at the beginning of the lesson to see where the student kind of gauge the student's understanding. Some assessments scattered throughout the middle to gauge learning, and then one at the end that is a formative assessment to gain an understanding of where the students are. These assessments do not have to be anything formal or anything written. Thumbs up and thumbs down can be an assessment that you plan for. If you say, give me 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, depending on your familiarity with this term that we're using, that is a form of assessment. To get out the door is another form of assessment. After you write your lesson plans, you're going to want to create a list of materials that you are going to be using. You're going to put these materials in 2 different artifacts for your edTPA Task 1. The first is a Part C, Instructional Materials. This should be any worksheets, any pictures of maybe things that the students will be using throughout their lessons. This should be no more than 5 pages, and each one of the materials should be labeled to the corresponding lesson. Now, you do not need to include things that you believe your scorer will know. Like if you're expecting the students to use a pencil, the scores are all going to know a pencil, so you don't need to put a picture of a pencil in there. Same with crayons. However, if you are using Unifix cubes, most educators know what the Unifix cubes are, but that could be a term used by some educators and not others, so a picture of those might be helpful. Or if the Unifix cubes, I had Unifix cubes in my classroom that had letters on them, and they were a little bit unique. And so if you were using something like that, you might want to take a picture of that. If you are going to be using a PowerPoint, you do not need to include every single slide of the PowerPoint, just a few key slides are fine. If you're going to be using a YouTube, remember you cannot put in that URL code for the YouTube video, so a screenshot is just fine, but the scorer is not going to be able to click on a web address and have it take them to that material. And then part D is going to be your assessments. So anything that you plan for an assessment, you're going to just list it out here, and then if it's questions that you might ask, you can list those and then refer back to where in the lesson plans you can find those. Or if it is a worksheet or a ticket out the door that you're going to hand to the students, you want to put that in your assessments. There's no reason for you to copy something twice if it's in the instructional materials. You don't also have to put it in the assessments unless you want to, but there's not a penalty for that. Don't stress too much about, should this go in the instructional material? Should this go into the assessments? As long as it's in one or the other and you are able to point to it to the score in your commentary, you are fine. Here is some examples of instructional materials. As you can see on this one, they've got the whiteboard, and then this was probably a poster that they included, or maybe a handout, and then also this was also maybe a slide or something separate. So these are separate things. This, on the other hand, is probably more of a worksheet that they handed out and then worked together. Here's some more examples. Here is an example of a PowerPoint where they don't include every single one of the PowerPoints, just some key slides. As you can see here, I want to point out that you need to label that it's lesson 1. Here's another one from lesson 1. This one, all 3 of them go to lesson 3, so they just put it at the top of the page. And then assessments. You need to have an assessment, at least 1 as a minimum. I say 3 as a minimum is a good rule of thumb, but at least 1 each day. And then you need to identify if you're doing that before, during, or after. Here's some examples of what your Part D assessment. This is just more of a list of the assessments that they would be doing. And then they'd probably have like the quiz, labeling quiz right here would be attached at the end of that. Here is some examples where they actually have a picture of one of the assessments, and then here the turn and talk just has more of a written description of what the students will be doing during that assessment. Here's another example of an assessment. See, it says lesson 3. This is what they're going to be doing, and this is the actual handout that they would have given the student. Do not stress too much about what your Part C and Part D artifacts look like, because really those are not going to be scored directly on a rubric. You are using those in your commentary to give examples and be able to tell the scorer, hey, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Here's what I'm going to be doing. You can see a picture of that if you look in Part D of my assessments, or if you look in Part C of my materials. The score is not going to actually grade the materials for Part C and Part D unless you directly point to it in your commentary. So make sure that anything that you put in Part C and Part D, you are mentioning in your commentary. If you're not mentioning in that commentary, you need to really consider why are you including it in your Part C or Part D materials page and assessment page. Otherwise, you need to look at your commentary and say, what have I not included and where can I cite this as an example? In the back of your handbook, you will have this page here that talks about the artifacts, and you will see that you have Part A as your context for learning. So even though you've already turned it in on SLL, it is actually part of task 1. You'll have your Part B, your lesson plans. It's important to note that your lesson plans should be no more than 4 pages per lesson, and it's going to be one file. So as I'm scrolling through those lesson plans, I should first see lesson plan 1, keep scrolling, lesson plan 2, keep scrolling, lesson plan 3, keep scrolling, and then if I have 4 or 5, they would be after that. Your instructional materials will also be one file. So you should be copying and pasting pictures of any worksheets into that same file, that same document. Same with the assessments, and then here are the different supported files. I do recommend you changing them to a PDF because that makes sure that the format will not change when you upload it to either SLL or edTPA, but it will take a doc. And then last is your planning commentary, Part E, your planning commentary, and you'll notice that the template is provided. I've tried to make this as easy as possible for you to go from SLL to edTPA. By in SLL, you will see the same types of things. Part A, you're going to resubmit that context for learning. This is a good opportunity that if you had some suggestions to change your context for learning, maybe you put the state name or the school name in the context for learning and you need to take those out, remove those, this is a good chance to resubmit that. Part B is your lesson plans. Part C, your instructional material. Part D, your assessment, and then underneath here, Part E is also, but the picture cut it off. And then here, you're going to just have kind of a self-check that you're going to check and make sure that you did each one of these things. And then on the far right, you're going to see how your tech check will be scored. There will be another video that addresses the commentary and goes prompt by prompt to show you how to write those commentaries.